Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is August 30th, 2024. Believe it or not, we're almost at the end of August, and you are listening and watching the Daily AI Show live. And today, we're going to give you our honest opinion about GPT Actions. They came out probably a year ago at this point, towards the end of last year for sure. And we want to talk about whether we think they've actually gotten much better or not. In our opinion, obviously, it's just our opinion, but we're going to give you our honest feedback. We do this usually every other Friday. We try to pick a tool, dig into it a little bit. We've done it with Opus Clip. We've done it with the script. We've done it with image creators, all sorts of different things. So you can go back through our library and find all sorts of honest reviews in there. So today we have Junmi, Andy, Beth, and I'm Brian. And yeah, we're going to kind of just dig in here. But I think before we do that, I will give a very brief ChatGPT-fied definition of what an action is, so we can all talk about the same thing. And then I'm going to happily pass it over to Jimmy, who knows more about this than I do and can talk through it. Because as we'll get into, I ran into a lot of errors and problems, but I think that's a good conversation to have about the user, and that's okay. You know, I don't have a super knowledge here. Jimmy definitely does, so we'll get into all of that. Okay, so a GPT action based on this is the definition coming from the custom GPT that OpenAI created for creating GPT actions. Everybody got that? That's a deep well there. But this is what it says. A GPT action is a way for GPT-based model like ChatGPT to interact with external APIs or services. By defining a GPT action, you create a bridge between the AI and a specific API, allowing the AI to make requests and retrieve information or perform tasks based on user input. In simple terms, a GPT action is a set of instructions that tells a GPT model how to call an external API. The purpose is to enable the GPT to fetch data or trigger actions using that API. And it includes details like the API endpoint, the data needed for the request, and the format of the response. This setup is often described in standard format like Open API, which outlines all the necessary details for making the API call. So there you go. There's the definition to get us all on the same page. What are we talking about? Well, we're just talking, it doesn't have to be a custom GPT, but we're just talking about connecting ChatGPT to external places. Okay, Jimmy, I'm going to let you take it from there, but that's sort of the overview, right? Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, definitely. Like Brian said, the key things here are connecting to other services APIs, right? By doing so, you can expand out the capabilities of your custom GPT. And that's the primary use for GPT actions. Now, there was some questions about whether you could use GPT actions in other locations. Technically, you can't, but in my experimentation, I did find a way to convert a known action into a bunch of into a function for an assistant. So I can go over that at the end if you like. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up my screen here to show us the. This is the cookbook, and this is what really reinvigorated the our eyeballs onto this situation, essentially. Because before there's some latency issues and it didn't connect very well, but now they've had a bit of time to work the bugs out and get consistent or fairly consistent responses. So you can see from the cookbook, and essentially a cookbook, they call it a cookbook because it's a recipe, it's directions on how to connect these other services. The ones that they've highlighted here are some of the more common enterprise uses. So they'll connect you to databases like Snowflake, or you can work with AWS. But the ones that we probably will use most often are these two connections here, the cookbook for Google Drive and the cookbook for Zapier. Mainly because with Google Drive gives us a source of all of our files, right? And we can just pretty much store anything we really want there and pull them in as needed. This is a little more involved than what you see in the regular ChatGPT interface, where you can connect your Google Drive through that point and bring in a file. So this offers a little more actions than just connecting the drive for bringing in the file. And the other one is the Zapier connection. So Zapier is an automation tool. And if you have any familiarity with it, you can connect it to, and they advertise like 6,000 different apps and things like that. So this is a way to multiply the capabilities of a GPT action in your custom GPT. Now, the thing I wanted to run through is their getting started example, right? It's essentially connecting a public API from weather.gov to give you some forecasting information, right? Most APIs do require authentication, but there are a few public ones out there, and they're normally government agencies or public agencies that just want you to be able to connect to it so that you can use their information, right? So this is an example of how most of the GPT action cookbooks will look like. They'll give you each of the steps that you need to go through, tell you, and then tell you some potential issues or debugging that you might need to do at the end. So this is the essential framework of what you're going to go through. Okay. Before I go into the to the nitty gritty of the GPTs themselves, are there any questions?
Well, I had one, just maybe more for a clarification. Sure. You mentioned some APIs, I think the way you said it, require authentication. So is another way of saying that is not all APIs are free. I mean, some of these could have like a paywall to them or a cost to accessing that pay. Like, couldn't they basically say like per token use of a particular API that you would incur a cost to, depending on what that API does? And then obviously some of them are free, like you just said.
Right. That's a great question. Normally, if it is a API that needs authentication, it's because you need to authenticate your user account with whatever service, right? So, for example, if you have an account with Notion, right, and you want to connect to your Notion databases so that you can interact with the information, update it, all of those kinds of things. You still need to have a Notion account. So the main reason for the authentication step is so that you can access your account. And of course, most of those services are paid, but there are some free ones out there. Like later on, I'll show you an example of how I connected to my Gmail. Okay. Does that answer the question? Oh, also, yeah, when I say public, that just means not authentication, and that means free, because if it doesn't require authentication, you can just freely connect to it. There are limits just for security and infrastructure parameters. They don't let you hit it 10 million times a second and things like that. So there are limitations to that. Okay, let's continue on, and I will take a look at this nice little weather GPT I created for DAS. So you can see from what I asked here is, what's the weather forecast for Boulder, Colorado for today? And it made it accessed the api.weather.gov, right, through its actions, and it was able to bring back this information. Okay. What's nice is it does explain what information was shared and what steps it took when connecting to that API. So it is all really straightforward and transparent. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the back end of this, right? So we'll go ahead and edit this, and let's see here. Okay. Oh, and of course it is giving me technical demos, everybody. All right. So we're on the back end of the GPT now, and we're in the configure step. All right. This is all the normal stuff you'll see: name, description. The instructions, I copied these instructions from their example. So you can notice it's following a basic structure. Here's the context, and then here are the step-by-step instructions that it's instructing the GPT to run, and then some additional information or additional context if these kinds of common situations show up. I went ahead and engaged all the capabilities. Probably don't need to on this, but right here is what we're looking at, is the actions. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look at those actions by clicking on that little gear symbol on the right. And this is the structure that you kind of need to be aware of and familiarize yourself. Authentication, whether your API that you're trying to access does require authentication or not. In this case, it doesn't require any, but you have your three choices: none, API key, and OAuth. So a little background. API key is a common way for a service to issue you a specialized and secure connection to them, right? They don't want anybody from anywhere just connecting to their services. So as part of your account, you generate a unique API key so that their system knows that it's you trying to connect, right? You might be putting it into another software or another application or whatnot, but that lets them know, oh, hey, this is me. The other way to authenticate is OAuth, or the other way that's supported anyways. OAuth is a Google system, and they essentially created it to be a generic authorization system that can be applied to, pretty much any other service that's out there. You do have to go through a bit of a few hoops to make sure that it's set up properly. But once you do set it up, then it becomes easier and easier to reuse credentials, or better practices would be create specific credentials for your specific use for each application of OAuth you want to use. And so this is where you can put in your API key and then its authentication type, right? This is information that is going to be provided by your service. So this is not something that you have to already know. Your service will explain out to you what types you need in their API documentation. All right. And the other one here is OAuth. So you can see that some of these things say hidden here. This is because this is more critical information. So you won't be shown in these dialog boxes. It won't return the actual characters. All right. So you have to be a little more mindful of the security of where those IDs and those keys are located. And again, these are all elements that you will find in the API documentation. So this is specifically OAuth. This here is specifically in the OAuth documentation, and the specific API access documentation for whatever service that you're trying to connect to. All right. Before I move on, any questions? Okay. All right. So now let's talk about schema. All right. So schema is essentially the outline that tells the API, hey, or tells the GPT, hey, this is how you access the API. Right. These are the individual operations and the parameters of that operation. These are the kind of responses to show the user if we're successful or unsuccessful, and things like that. So these schemas can include, or should include, all of the various functions or accessible pieces of the service through that API. So you can notice here, once you have the location, you can get the forecast. That's essentially what that translates to. And in here is essentially, hey, I know the name of a place, but the API needs longitude and latitude. So let's go get that for the name of the place that I provide. So those are the two main actions that you can have. And you can see that they are represented down here, and does allow you to test each of these just to make sure that they're going through. Now, one of the key notes that OpenAI does talk about when it comes down to testing the API is if you want to get a little more nitty gritty into your testing, is you should sign up for Postman. Postman is a service that just allows you to ping your APIs just to make sure that they're working right, or if you get an error message or things like that. It's an indispensable tool for anyone who's working with APIs. It is a little bit more of a curve, so if you're not interested in getting that deep into it, this is probably what's going to suffice for you.
So, Jimmy,
Okay.
I want to pause you there really quick because as you're going through and sort of walking through the demo side of it, I also wanted to talk about, obviously you have a bit of knowledge here. So Beth, Andy, you guys do too. So please chime in. I know from this group, I'm definitely the one with the least amount of knowledge in this area. So I want to make sure I'm learning from you, and our users are, our listeners rather, are as well. So this is, as things go, it's used as an example with OpenAI because we would call this a very fairly straightforward. The weather one is very straightforward, easy to set up. So just give us an idea of, from start to finish, knowing what you know, how quickly were you able to set up this example action and actually use it to get weather back? What would you say start to finish?
Start to finish, if you don't run into any issues, I think it took me 20 minutes.
Okay. So pretty fast. I mean, as things go, I mean, if you were literally looking for a GPT that can interact and bring in real-time data, weather data, 20 minutes is really not a lift much at all. However, you said if you don't run into any issues, right? So whether you're running into API connections and things like that. Now, my next question is, I don't know if you can run them. I mean, maybe just on the right side of your screen on the test side of for the sandbox. Can we just see how quickly we're getting an answer back? Because obviously one of the issues that I've run into, not obviously, but others, is the latency issue. So in this simple version, since we're just asking for weather, let's see how fast it runs really quick, because I think this will be a nice little benchmark for future conversations here.
All right. So apologize for the typing sounds.
Okay.
All right. So tell me about the weather in New York City. Let's see what it gives. All right. So this is actually a good highlight point. So whenever you're running any action, anytime you're going to request information outside of the GPT, as a security feature, the GPT always asks you to confirm that you wanted to do it, right? So normally, if you want that GPT to run consistently for you, you would hit always allow. But in this case, we're just going to hit allow. So it's going to go through, talk to the weather gov there, and now it got a response, and now it's feeding out that response to us.
So I'm going to say, I mean, you had a pause there to explain the permission allowance, but I'm going to say that was like a 10 Mississippi, right? Something like that. So fairly quick. I mean, look, you can get the weather on your phone. So it's not about like it being the weather, because I'm not sure how much of a use case this is for people, but it's just a demo, right? It's just a demo to show the connectors, how the API works for something that doesn't need authorization. You said it was open in public. It's a national weather, thing or whatever. So 20 minutes to set it up, and you're going to get answers back in 10 seconds. And I think maybe just worth mentioning, you haven't lost the functionality of your ChatGPT as ChatGPT either. So let's say, as a follow-up, you don't have to do it, but just for our listeners, I got the weather. Now I want to go do something with that knowledge, right? So you could take that weather and then quickly turn that into whatever your next prompt would be about. I don't know, tell me a story about a bear who's dealing with this weather in Central Park in New York City. And it should, well, there you go. We'll see.
Tell me a story about a bear. Hey, why not? It's a tech demo.
Tell me a story about a bear in Central Park with this weather. And we'll see if
in Central Park. All right.
Sure. We wanted to pull in the knowledge from the API. And this is just, as Jimmy's doing this is just a demo, just something to remember. When you're connecting, you're not exclusively saying, now this is the only way I can use this ChatGPT, this custom GPT. So we're already getting a once upon a time. I can't really read it. So just tell me if there's anything in there that calls to the type of weather. Oh, it does say 72 degrees. I see it.
Yep. has the weather
And
in
let's
there,
confirm, was
has
it
the sky
72 today?
blanketed with shades of gray. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so there's a good example of we called and retrieved
Mm-hmm.
current real-time information, because this could be any API to anywhere, and then we're using the power of the language model to then do something with that data. This is no different than prompt series, where you might call out to the internet and say, give me the latest information on Microsoft, and it's going to go to the web and do that, and then bring that information back, and then we're going to do something with that data. We do this in sales all the time when we're doing prospecting and stuff. This is a little different though, because you're specifically calling out to like a database, or you're calling out to a knowledge source, and it might be behind lock and key, right? It might be your specific data. It could be your Google Drive, your Slack integrations, whatever the case may be. I don't want to go too much farther than that, but I just wanted to at least point that out so people understand like where the value actually is here.
So,
Now we haven't gotten into when it fails, but
well,
go ahead, Beth.
to that point, one of the things that Jimmy said, or and Brian as well, like as long as nothing is going wrong, this is how it functions. So one of the things that's important to know is where the error could be, right? So that challenge is on OpenAI's side. That's ChatGPT saying, do you really want me to go out and do this? And so I'm going to say, I need you to say yes, right? Full consent. Full consent, we're going outside. And are you consenting forever? Or is this just a one-time consent? Or have you said, no, I do not consent. I did not mean to do that, right? So there's that kind of thing. The other thing that, just to go back into the schema and the API, one of the ways that I explain that is that the API is like your backdoor secret handshake, right? And it's personal to you or it's not. But if it's like if it's authenticated to you and it's your own thing and it says copy this because you're never going to be able to see this again, totally hidden from this point on, that's your personal secret handshake. And so if you think about that, the challenges that could function with that backdoor secret handshake could be how many people are at the back door, how much room the back door has for individual secret handshakes, right? It's not people, but let's just go there. And how big the area is that could have that many receivers for that secret handshake. So like understanding those kinds of concepts when you're trying to troubleshoot is really helpful, because like it's like, hey, I got a code, I gave you the code, what's up? And it's important to know who, like where in that process you're trying to troubleshoot. Back to you, Jimmy.
That's super helpful though.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few more things that I want to go through and as part of the process, and then I'll show you a little more of at the end what kind of issues you might run into, and it's usually particularly around authentication. All right. So we've seen these different we've seen this action. We've seen how we can use it in multiple instances. This is a fantastic example of how to integrate it with the whatever your end result is. But the idea is here is access to these various services that will provide me whatever data or information that I need, and then I can use that to integrate into what my overall goal is, whether it's to write a story or in particular plan a trip, or those kinds of things where weather information may be, helpful. Now, I wanted to show a bit of the configure page here, and this is the last bit, and I think the most important bit with beyond just the other quality of life updates that OpenAI did to GPT Actions. And that is, you can do multiple. My biggest hang up when they first introduced it was your GPT could only have one action. So it essentially grabbed that one piece of information, and however you could use it within the GPT or the Chat GPT system is how you could, is what that GPT was going to be. But now with multiple actions, you can draw in multiple services. And with that allows you to do multi-stage planning, right? So for example, I was thinking, well, how could we use this um, for repurposing, right? So, I hit up Perplexity and I asked it, it's like, okay, so I want to take this podcast and I want to move it into multiple or repurpose it. So I could connect, I could have a GPT, repurposing GPT that would take the podcast, right? I could grab the podcast from Google Drive, right? I've recorded it onto Google Drive. I then can have an action to contact Descript to translate the transcript, or grab from the audio file and or video file and grab me the transcript from Descript. Then I could have the GPT go ahead and access Zapier.
Hey, Jimmy, real quick.
Yeah.
I just in case you did switch screens, I'm still seeing the weather GPT. Did you show? Are you
Oh
showing?
no, yeah, I didn't. I didn't switch over here. I can show you. I can show you some of the steps that Perplexity.
Okay, I just
offers.
want to make sure if you were looking at a different screen. That's all.
No. I was just listing it out. So once I can connect once I connect Descript, take that transcript from the Google Drive, or create the transcript from the Google Drive, I can take that transcript and then I can use ChatGPT to break it out into, whatever components or whatever the value is from that podcast. Then I can take those clips or those bits of the transcripted text, or write a Twitter post, write a LinkedIn post, write a Facebook post. And then I can use my connection, my GPT action to Zapier to then distribute all of those posts straight from the GPT. So this example is just repurposing that content, but I could use one single GPT with all of these GPT action connections to do all of that processing, which theoretically should save me a lot of time, since I can do it all from one place and not have to go everywhere to do it. It takes a little time to set up, of course, but once you've got it set up, you've pretty much automated that structure. All right.
I have a question.
Any questions before I go on to my next example?
Yep, I have a question.
Sure.
So you described a series of functions in a chain of actions, in effect, that you had predefined. And so you had multiple actions and you did that. Just explain where the sequencing or calling of that series of functions happens in the configuration of a custom GPT.
Okay. So actions are accessed by the custom GPT. Here, I can bring this back up, through your instructions, right? You need to be very specific on how these actions are accessed. You have to explain to the GPT, I need to go to the weather app when I ask anything about weather. I need to go to my Zapier action when I mention Zapier, or I talk about automation, or using any of those kinds of trigger words, right? So you want to set up your trigger and then what the response would be. So it is a chain, but you are the one moving the chain along, right? You can give instructions to provide. You can give. The user can give an instruction of, hey, grab this file from Google Drive, throw it into Descript to get me a translation or a transcript, and then use my Zapier connection to, or convert it into posts, and then use Zapier to send it off to all of my platforms. But that all has to be inputted from the user, right? There is no one-click button kind of solution there.
But there is a technique that's used by many custom GPT builders who do advanced things, Grimoire, for example, where they have shortcuts. Type C, and it spins through a whole series of actions that have been in fact pre-programmed in the instructions. So you can capture a sequence of actions in your
Right.
instructions and give it a designation that the user can call with just a single keystroke.
Right. Yes, and that all goes back to the you need to have all of those pre-programmed essentially instructions or step-by-step instructions in your overall instructions for the GPT. But yeah, you can optimize it, but that does all have to be laid out.
And
Okay.
that saves the user things like typing,
Yes.
but it doesn't. It's the equivalent, right? So if you type C, the system still experiences all of that equivalent. So it doesn't save context or those sorts of things. It just makes it easier for the user to type.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've gone over what the back end of the GPT looks like. We've gone over what the actions look like, explaining each of the pieces there. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the library here, right? So,
Before we do that, Justin asked a really good question, so let's do
Sure.
this on air. In a
Okay.
custom GPT, does adding detailed instructions, knowledge files, a lengthy API schema with internal LLM system instructions strain the transformer's ability to maintain attention in long chats?
Ooh.
Yeah, this is why I want to do it on air.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly.
And that's why I want to talk about it.
That's the answer. It's the context window. Everything is the context window. There is only so many tokens. There's only so many characters. And everything that you do is fed into that process. You're asking the LLM for all of these parameters, process it, and send it back to you. So that's going to eat up the context.
Right. So one of the reasons that I want to answer it on air and not just leave that answer in the chat was because OpenAI in many ways is a black box, right? So if you're having problems, does it add so much that it strains the transformer's ability to maintain attention in long chats? That is assuming that you're experiencing the same transformer through the whole thing. And a while ago, OpenAI said, basically, we reserve the right to send it to a different model, right? So, yes, is the simple answer to that question. And it's not necessarily the only answer to the question, because part of what we're talking about here is like, what do you do when you troubleshoot? So I wouldn't necessarily look at that and automatically say it's too much. You want to run it a couple different times at different times, those sorts of things. And often what we hear is, no, it was working so well on Wednesday. And now, like, I don't know what happened. It's just not talking to me anymore. So, yes, that happens. That happens without changing anything, is just my point.
Yeah, exactly. But that was a great question, Justin. Now, the next part I want to move on to is the authentication part. And like we said, and I'm sure all of us have had issues with with using APIs and particularly with authentication. And so I wanted to bring those up. So first of all, I went ahead and I wanted to do also another test on a GPT action that that could be useful to me, and that was for a connection to Gmail. All right, that way I could query all of my Gmail or all my email in Gmail, and I could look for particular threads and things like that. And so I looked at the cookbook, and again, you know, you're pretty much set up here, right? Here's the introduction. They always refer back to the basic information before you get started. If you found this cookbook out of sequence, it gives you the basic information of what the application would be needed, what kind of accounts you need set up, things like that, and then gets into the steps. Right. So what's nice about the cookbooks is they provide you a good basis for instructions. Then they provide you the schema, and you can see the schema is quite long because every entry in the schema is going to be something that you can do in the API, right? So that can get quite lengthy. Now, here's the authentication instructions. Now, because this uses OAuth, it's a little more, there's a little more involved than your standard API key, which once you've generated in that system, you can simply copy and paste, and you're good to go. Now, for OAuth, you need to use Google Cloud Console. And if you are familiar with the backend of AWS systems or Google Cloud Console, it is not designed for user friendliness. It is designed sort of as a barrier of entry because you shouldn't be there unless you know what you're doing, kind of thing. But essentially, to get OAuth set up, you need to go, once you've got the account and you're logged into the console and everything, you would need to go to your API services. Since this is Gmail, you can search for Gmail APIs and make sure that those are enabled. Then comes the tricky part, creating the OAuth credentials. Now, if it's the first time that you are ever creating credentials, and this is the part that gets a lot of people, is Google forces you to go into a separate, complete process to create the OAuth screen, right? And this is where this is the thing that's going to pop up, ask you for your email or log in with this, your account, and send that off to Google to verify. Then the tricky part is after you go through all of that process and you fill in all of the information, luckily it doesn't require too many steps. And I can show you a little bit of what that looks like. So this is the OAuth consent screen. So you have to set it up. You have to add in who your test users are and things like that. So if I edit this here, you can see there's a lot of information that you don't need to fill in. But if you don't know that, that can slow you down, right? So once you've created that consent screen, you need to go back manually and hit create credentials again. And I can't tell you, when I first started trying to get this all set up, they always miss that spot. They never say, oh, now you need to go back to where you were and do the exact thing that you were trying to do the first time and go through it. All right. I'm not going to show the credentials right now because they're usually secret information in there. But essentially, you can go through and create new credentials because I can create a new client ID and go through this process. Okay. Any questions so far? I can do more on the Google Cloud side, but I figured I'd just get back to the to the rest of the cookbook.
Well, I think based on time, what we should probably do here is just spend a few minutes and actually talk about, our impressions of using it for the different people. I want to make sure that we're getting that part out of it. Obviously, the show is about the review of it. I can go really quick on mine and then pass it off to, because I haven't heard much from Andy and a little bit less from Beth. But so I think generally, as I said, I'm probably the least experienced, educated of the four of us. However, I've certainly played with APIs. I've certainly played less, but I played with OAuths. So I'm not a newbie, but I almost always am going to require some help along the way. So whether that's in the cookbook, and look, that depends really on how well the cookbook is written and to what audience that cookbook is written. Because sometimes the cookbook comes in at a higher level than I am. So now I'm fighting and saying, I'm having to give that URL to ChatGPT and say, essentially dumb this down, bring this down to my level, right? Which is fine. I think everybody is doing that. Schemas and actions and calling and retrieval, that gets really complicated. In my experience, specifically in custom GPTs using actions, it just has continued to not be great. I'm fully aware that some of that is my limitations, but I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I can usually work my way and ask the right questions and get the right help, especially when OpenAI has created a custom GPT for writing instructions for actions, right? That's the one I gave you the definition. That was that custom GPT. So they have created a tool to make this easier for you. I will tell you, just in my experience, Jimmy, you got your Gmail one to work. I did not. I don't know where it went wrong. It just does an infinite loop of it's connecting, it's not connecting, nothing's happening or whatever, but just never, ever got it to work. I also did one, not the Notion one, but there was a different one, similar result. If you go way back to the beginning with me and Carl, we went around and around for probably 2 hours one evening, late in the evening, where we could not get the Zapier. We had identical screens. We were doing identical patterns. His would work and mine wouldn't. Beyond frustrating. So what I would just say to this is, I love the idea, but I do not personally, as much as I write and create brand new custom GPTs, and I do it all the time, when I have a client that's like, ooh, can we do this? I'm usually, this is just God honest truth, I'm usually like, I mean, we can, but let's see if we don't have to. Because I feel like it's just not a great user experience, even after you get it set up, just with the allow and stuff like that. I find from the user experience, it doesn't feel fully baked. It doesn't feel fully fleshed out. It can time out. It can have latency issues. We didn't really see that with the weather, but that was a simple call and retrieval. It can easily be a minute or two or more, and that's more than most people are probably willing to wait. And we have also, Carl and I have also seen it chunk the data and only retrieve some of it. So we had one where it sent it to Slack, and Slack's like, sure. And then in Slack, you got the first half of the answer. So the context window wasn't longer. And so we had issues with that. And it was just a frustrating experience. So I'll stop there because I don't have much more to offer than that. That's my experience. And if I have a client that wants me to connect it tomorrow, we'll do that. But I'm going to really ask a lot of questions about why that specifically needs to happen. And then we could discuss what solutions there might be. I'm still, even 9 months later, even maybe more than that, not a huge fan of custom GPT actions. That's my take on it. What about you guys?
So I'm gonna pop in here and say that's why I was talking about troubleshooting all the way through, because when you're getting that like circle of death, didn't connect, is that because OpenAI has slowed you down, right? So you're like reaching out your hand for that handshake in slow motion, even though you're not, like you're doing the whole thing. OpenAI has added that. Is it too many people at the back door? Is it like there's so many things you could do that? And now that you've seen what actions are, the best way to use this is to have it write the code for you so that you can put it somewhere and do this, right? Like it's like going through a whole bunch of maze steps so that you don't have to touch code. And it's okay to touch code. Like seriously, Grimoire will write it for you. It will deploy it for you. It will walk you through so will Claude, so will Project, so will Gemini. Like all of them can do this because this is actually a relatively simple piece. That's my I agree with Brian. I didn't even get that far. I was like, oh, this is so much easier in another place. Like, let's just do this. Write me a web page with JavaScript that calls the thing, and then I'm in more control over where the problem is, if there's a problem. Andy.
Yeah, my TLDR is this is a tool that's made available to developers so that they can build custom GPTs in a corporate context that accesses corporate information. And so, for example, if you're building a special custom GPT that anybody can access in the company, there's more difficult issues around, are you permitted to see the information that this now has the access to? So it's not a simple thing, and it's going to be a developer who is responsible for building these things out as custom actions for that purpose. I want to use the Zapier example. Now, Zapier, as most of you know, is a company that's been building API integrations with a host of like literally thousands of different applications that are used in companies. And they have a little twist that you can exploit here. Instead of building a custom action to go out and access Zapier, and then you got to figure out which zaps you want to use, they have an OpenAI integration. So if you go over to Zapier, you can build an OpenAI integrated zap, right? And that zap can be triggered. And then you build a bunch of zaps over there. That zap can be triggered by a custom GPT. So all you have to do is copy and paste the Zapier supplied code into your custom GPT in the action space. That's the limit of what you would have to do. You don't have to build a schema. You don't have to do all those things. They've kind of shortcut the whole process. So if you really wanted to, build a custom GPT that had a wider range of capabilities beyond what's already available in there, like web browsing, data analysis, and generating images, you can get those automagically right there in custom GPT. Then there are some, let's call them middlewares that will, solve this problem for you. If you're like Brian, like me, not coders by nature, this is way too complicated for me, and I would just, give up after about 30 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so look, what you're getting here is, and this is exactly why we do these shows, because we all don't have the same experiences. Clearly, Beth and Jimmy have a lot of more experience doing this. And whereas I think if I had a guess, Beth, just knowing you, if we both started at the same spot, we were building exact same actions onto a custom GPT. What Andy said really resonates with me. Where I'm going to get frustrated and where you're going to get frustrated are I'm probably 20 minutes earlier than you, at least. I find that when things aren't moving along and I can't get decent answers along with it, I'm not a developer, that it becomes problematic. What I'll say though, I could get past all of that. Truthfully, I could. I care so much about the end user experience because that's just so much of what I focus on and at scaled is what is it like for the end user. And with AI, I was at a lunch meeting the other day. We were laughing about how much variability there is in AI and trying to get the same answer to a lot of people because that's kind of fighting AI against what AI does without language models. But for that, trying to create that user experience, in my opinion, considering how long it's been out, I don't feel like OpenAI is taking this as a big thing, like a serious thing that they want to work harder on. I could be wrong. Maybe the next model, we'll see some deployment. It'll be amazing. Maybe they're working on it right now. As it sits right now, and considering how long it's looked almost identical to this, I feel like it's not a top priority for OpenAI. And I think it really shows when you look at other things like artifacts from Claude, how drastically different the user experience is. Because to me, this and the Claude artifacts are night and day. I mean, that's just my experience on it. So I know we're getting on time here, but worth saying. Any last thoughts, Jimmy, before we go?
Yeah, I think there's value in the experience, of course, but I do agree that with artifacts and other tools, Cursor, those kinds of things that have come out, you probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this. So if you want to try out GPT Actions, if you're looking for quick pre-created solutions, I think that's where the value is right now, is that the cookbooks work, in my experience anyways, they work really well. There's a lot of cutting and pasting, right? So if you just grabbed what they already did, you did the connection, then you can access all of those actions. So if you wanted to create a personal one, that might be useful to you, especially if you're trying to compare to what you get out of an artifact or something like that. So I agree with you, Brian. It's probably not something that you would spend a lot of time in creating something for someone else, but a lot of internal things, your own personal thing. And if you just see in the cookbook, it's like, oh, that solves my issue. All right, cool. Cut, paste, go. Then you're probably golden. It's probably its best use case so far.
Okay. I mean, and if you want to write bear stories about current weather situations,
Sure.
There's that too. You can do that for your own amusement and your own child's amusement. Oh, it's raining outside in Tampa. Let's write a story about that. I mean, there's some cool ways that could be really fun for people and stuff. Okay, we're going to leave it there. Don't forget, you can go to dailyishow.com. We've had a whole bunch of great, amazing conversations this week. It's been a fun one. I really think we've dug into a lot of cool areas, a lot of corners and stuff like that. We'll be back, obviously, all next week. Yes, in the States, Monday is Labor Day, but we'll still have a show. So come hang out with us if you have the day off and you're in the States. Otherwise, we know we have viewers and listeners around the world. So we will be here Monday to Friday next week, as we have been the entire last year. And look, our next newsletter is coming out on Sunday. So last thing I'll say is go to thedailyishow.com and sign up. Sign up before Saturday night Eastern time so that you can get on the list and you will get the newsletter that goes out Sunday morning. Really, really proud of it. Would love to see more of y'all on that newsletter, totally free. And no, we're not soliciting you or anything like that. So, all right, that's it. We'll see you. Have a great weekend, everybody, or 3-day weekend for some of y'all. And we'll see you then. Bye.
Aloha.